It was just another warm Tuesday morning in Atlanta. The sun peeked through the trees lining Maplewood Avenue, casting gentle shadows across the quiet suburban street. Birds chirped softly, and the distant hum of traffic added to the rhythm of an ordinary day. But for one woman, what began as a routine drive to court would soon spiral into something completely unexpected. Something that would rattle the foundation of assumptions and leave a powerful message behind. Judge Tamara Hill had spent most of her life working her way through barriers, ignoring whispers, and focusing on justice. Dressed in a simple navy suit with her hair neatly pulled back, she looked like any professional woman commuting to work. Her black Lexus glided down the road smoothly. She wasn't speeding. Her seatbelt was on. Her music was barely audible. But none of that mattered. When the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser filled her rearview mirror, she sighed, not in panic, not in guilt, but in that tired, familiar way that only those who've lived through such moments can truly understand. She carefully pulled over, placing her hands at 10 and 2, like she'd been taught. The officer's footsteps echoed as he approached. Her window rolled down. "You know why I pulled you over?" His tone wasn't friendly. It was cold, condescending. "No, officer," Tamara said calmly, meeting his eyes. "Your taillight's out," he said curtly, glancing quickly at the back of the car, even though it was still broad daylight. "That's strange. I had it replaced last week," she replied, but he wasn't listening. Before she could speak again, he turned back abruptly, walked to the rear, and with one sharp, deliberate motion, smashed the taillight himself with the butt of his flashlight. The cracking plastic made her flinch. "Now it is," he muttered. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from a sudden flood of disbelief and fury she had learned to control. The act was so brazen, so unapologetic, but she remained calm. This wasn't the time to reveal who she was. Not yet. The officer barked orders, treating her like she was just another target, another inconvenience on his beat. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't recognize her face, despite it being plastered across billboards during her campaign, despite her courtroom being 5 blocks from that very street. To him, she was just a black woman in a nice car. Nothing more. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that he had just made a dangerous mistake. Tamara Hill wasn't just someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's colleague. She was a sitting judge in the Fulton County Superior Court, and she wasn't about to let this go quietly. Across the city, miles away from this unfolding injustice, another scene was taking shape. A city bus groaned to a stop on Peachtree Avenue. A young black teen named Malik stepped aboard, nodding politely to the driver as he scanned the nearly full rows of tired commuters. He was tall and thin, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and eyes that held a quiet determination. He had dreams of becoming an engineer, and today he was headed downtown to visit a small robotics firm for a student mentorship session. Malik found a seat near the middle, sliding in and pulling out a well-worn book from his bag. But before he could even read a full page, something tugged at his attention. A pregnant white woman stepped onto the bus, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping the pole tightly as she looked for a place to sit. No one moved. Eyes were averted. Some even pretended to sleep. Without hesitation, Malik stood up and offered her his seat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, stepping aside. She looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you," she said, lowering herself into the seat with a small sigh of relief. He nodded, smiled gently, and leaned against the pole nearby. The rest of the ride was uneventful, quiet even. But as the bus neared her stop, the woman reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and handed it to Malik. "This is for you," she said softly. "Please don't read it until you're off the bus." He blinked, confused. "All right." She stepped off at the next stop, disappearing into the crowd. Malik waited until he reached his own destination before unfolding the note. What he read inside made his legs feel weak. His mind spun. It wasn't just a thank you. It was an invitation, a connection. A new chapter waiting to unfold. Meanwhile, back on Maplewood Avenue, Officer Dean Whitaker leaned casually against his patrol car, smug and self-assured, jotting down nonsense on a citation pad. He still had no idea who Tamara was, and Tamara, though quietly fuming, sat still, choosing silence for now. When he finally handed her the ticket, she accepted it calmly. "You'll be seeing me again," she said, her voice laced with quiet power. He smirked. Not likely, but he would, much sooner than he thought. Later that day, the courtroom, buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers, plaintiffs, and clerks preparing for the morning docket. And then the door opened. Judge Hill stepped in, confident, professional, commanding respect. Dean Whitaker stood in stunned silence from the gallery. It was her, the woman whose taillight he had shattered with his own hand, the woman he mocked and dismissed. She wasn't a nobody. She was the judge presiding over a misconduct case filed against him, and she hadn't even started yet. As Malik stood outside the robotics firm holding the note that could change everything for him, and as Officer Whitaker sat frozen in disbelief, in a courtroom he thought he'd never enter as a defendant, the city of Atlanta whispered a quiet truth beneath its breath, a truth about kindness, dignity, and the quiet power of those underestimated. And the stories of Malik and Judge Hill were only just beginning to unfold. What came next would shake assumptions, break silence, and demand attention, in ways no one expected. Tamara sat in her chambers, the heavy wooden door closed behind her, blocking out the noise of the bustling courthouse. Her fingers gently traced the edges of the citation Officer Whitaker had written just hours earlier. The words felt like an insult, not just to her, but to every person who'd ever been dismissed or degraded because of how they looked. A broken taillight, something so petty, but he'd smashed it himself, on purpose. That wasn't law enforcement. That was abuse of power. She wasn't new to situations like this. Tamara had worked hard to keep herself composed in the face of injustice. She had been a public defender first, then a prosecutor. She had sat in courtrooms filled with doubt, skepticism, and occasionally outright hostility. But nothing ever stopped her from rising. The black robe she wore wasn't just a symbol of her success. It was a responsibility she carried for her community, for the young girls who looked like her, and the mothers who prayed their children would one day be safe in a world that often felt unfair. She stared out the window for a long moment. The city moved on below her, people walking, driving, laughing, rushing. Most had no idea what had happened that morning, but she did, and she wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. In another part of the city, Malik sat on a bench outside the robotics building, the note still clutched in his hand. He had read it 5 times, maybe more, and each time it felt more unbelievable. Inside the folded paper was not only a thank you, but an invitation. The woman he gave his seat to was the CEO of a tech foundation, one that awarded scholarships and internships to underrepresented students in science and engineering, and now she wanted to meet him. His heart beat faster, not from fear but from something unfamiliar, hope. Malik had always been the kind of person who helped quietly. He held doors open, offered his seat, carried groceries for neighbors. But no one ever noticed. No one ever stopped to thank him like this. He wasn't used to the spotlight. And now, suddenly he had a chance to walk through a door that had remained closed his entire life. He glanced at the glass doors of the firm in front of him. He wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a clean polo and jeans, but he had brought his portfolio, a battered folder full of diagrams, sketches, and rough blueprints for a robot he had been building from scrap parts in his garage. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was his. As he walked in, a receptionist greeted him, smiling warmly. "You must be Malik," she said. "Ms. Harding is expecting you." He blinked. "She is?" The woman nodded. "Right this way." Malik followed her down a sleek hallway, passing rooms filled with tech prototypes, blinking lights, and monitors showing 3D models of mechanical designs. His fingers itched to touch everything, to ask questions, to explore. But he stayed calm, quiet, curious. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, Tamara was preparing for the afternoon session. She had read over the documents on her desk a dozen times. The case of misconduct involved several officers from the local precinct, including Dean Whitaker. Complaints had piled up against them over the past year: excessive force, racial profiling, and tampering with evidence. But nothing ever seemed to stick. The complaints were always brushed aside or buried under technicalities. Now, Tamara had the power to bring those issues into the light. But she also knew the risks. She had seen judges get targeted for less. Her colleagues warned her to stay neutral, to play it safe. But how could she ignore what she had experienced firsthand? How could she pretend to be impartial when the system itself kept allowing the same patterns to repeat? There was a knock at the door. Her assistant peeked in. "Court's ready when you are, Judge." She nodded and stood, adjusting her robe. Her heels echoed against the marble floor as she walked into the courtroom. The murmur of voices quieted instantly. All eyes turned to her. Among them, Officer Whitaker sat beside his attorney, looking stiff and pale. For once, his confidence had cracked. Tamara sat at the bench, her expression unreadable. She called the room to order and began reading the charges aloud. Her voice was calm but firm. It was clear she meant business. Outside, news of a possible corruption scandal within the precinct had already begun to ripple through social media. A few journalists had caught wind of something brewing in court and were gathering near the entrance. But no one yet knew about the personal connection between the judge and the lead defendant. That revelation was coming, and when it did, it would explode. Back at the tech firm, Malik sat across from Ms. Harding, the pregnant woman from the bus. Her office was bright, filled with framed photos of her two daughters, engineering awards, and posters from past youth science competitions. She listened intently as Malik explained his ideas, flipping through his sketches and notes. "You built this motor housing out of a blender part?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, a little nervous. "Yeah, it was just lying around. I figured it could handle the torque." She smiled. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Resourceful, creative, practical." Malik's face lit up. "I'd like to offer you a summer mentorship," she said. "You'd work with our engineers, learn from them. Maybe even get a scholarship next fall. How does that sound?" He could barely speak. Thank you. I didn't expect—" "You earned this," she said, cutting him off gently. "Kindness matters, and so does talent. You've shown me both." Outside the office, the sun dipped lower in the sky. The city kept moving, unaware that lives were being reshaped in quiet, powerful ways. And as Malik stepped out of that building with new purpose, and Judge Tamara Hill presided over a case that could shake the very foundation of a broken system, the tension that had begun that morning hadn't gone away. It was just getting deeper. What Malik didn't know yet was that the opportunity he had been given would put him in the middle of something bigger than robotics. And what Officer Whitaker didn't realize was that his actions were now part of a growing storm, one that would challenge the very role of power, race, and justice in the city of Atlanta. But for now, no one knew how the pieces would fall. The question still hung in the air like thick summer heat. Would justice win this time, or would the system strike back harder than before? The answer wasn't clear. Not yet. A few days later, in a packed courtroom, witness testimonies and clear evidence exposed Officer Whitaker's misconduct. Judge Tamara delivered her verdict, firm, fearless, and fair. The law, she reminded everyone, does not bend for prejudice. As Whitaker lowered his eyes in silence, it sent a clear message. When power is abused, justice won't stay quiet. Meanwhile, Malik began his internship, and within weeks, his name appeared in a national science competition. A simple act of kindness had changed 2 lives, and maybe even challenged an entire mindset.